I, Ibrahim Fryer, declare that Africa will no longer be a playground for foreign powers. Our sovereignty is not for sale, and we will protect it with unwavering resolve. On a calm Tuesday morning at 8:00 a.m., the city of Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso woke to something unexpected. Military trucks rumbled through the streets, their engines low and steady as they made their way toward a plain office building. On the city's eastern edge, soldiers stepped out, boots striking the ground with purpose. Without a word, they moved. Inside swift, precise, and coordinated. Inside, they uncovered stacks of documents, hard drives, and encrypted phones, tools of a shadowy operation. Outside, the building bore the sign of an ordinary telecommunications company. But it was anything but ordinary. Under the leadership of Troy, Burkina Faso's government had learned the truth. This company was a front, secretly working for Israel, to gather sensitive intelligence about the region. This wasn't a random sweep. It was the first strike in a calculated operation. By 11 a.m., Troy's forces had shut down 6 more companies across the country, all tied to Israel. Networks frozen, doors locked, operations dismantled, each move executed without public warning. Troy wasn't just cleaning house, he was sending a clear, unmistakable message to Benjamin Netanyahu. This was the opening act of something far bigger, an effort to break the grip of foreign influence. On African soil, for years, Israel had been quietly weaving a network of control across Africa. On the surface, it came in the form of defense contracts, technology partnerships, and aid programs. They looked like tools to strengthen African nations, but hidden beneath were strings that led back to Tel Aviv. Many of these deals opened doors to Africa's most guarded information: natural resource data, political movements, even migration patterns. Companies like the one in Ouagadougou were nothing more than facades, designed to funnel intelligence back to Israel. Troy had been watching, waiting, and now, the quiet game was over. Troy had always known these deals weren't about helping Africa, they were about control. Under Netanyahu's leadership, Israel had built a quiet but powerful system to monitor and influence African nations, all while keeping out of sight. Troy decided the game was over. It was time to act, and when he did, there was no holding back. At 2 p.m. that same Tuesday, he stood before a wall of reporters and cameras. No raised voice, no grand gestures, just calm, measured words that carried the weight of a hammer. "Blow, Africa is not your blind spot anymore," he said. It wasn't a line meant for enemies or even neighboring nations. It was aimed squarely at Benjamin Netanyahu. Troy was calling out Israel's hidden network, dragging it into the light for the entire world to see. And he didn't stop at words. In that same moment, he announced that every defense and surveillance contract with Israel in Burkina Faso was canceled on the spot. Any organization tied to foreign intelligence was ordered to leave the country. Diplomats suspected of running secret operations had until morning to pack their bags and get out. Soon, the images began flooding social media. Empty offices once run by Israeli-linked companies, computers sealed in boxes, soldiers escorting staff out of buildings. Military trucks rolled away carrying crates of encrypted communication gear. Troy hadn't asked for permission. He hadn't issued warnings. He acted swiftly and without hesitation, and the world took notice. The shockwaves didn't stop at Burkina Faso's borders. By nightfall, Mali announced it was halting all imports of Israeli military technology. Guinea suspended its joint cybersecurity projects with Israel. Niger went further, launching a sweeping investigation into foreign-backed infrastructure deals to see if they concealed similar intelligence operations. In just 3 days, 3 nations had joined Burkina Faso's stand, with more preparing to follow. A wave was building across the continent. In Israel, the reaction was immediate shock, then panic. Netanyahu called an emergency meeting with his top advisors. Leaked reports from Israeli media described a scene of chaos behind closed doors. Inside the Israeli government, Netanyahu's advisors were scrambling. One reportedly told him, "This isn't just about Burkina Faso anymore. He's building a wall against us." They weren't wrong. Troy's campaign wasn't just about shutting down a handful of companies, it was about setting a new precedent. for how African nations could defend themselves from foreign influence. This was no spur-of-the-moment crackdown. It was part of a broader plan Troy had been shaping for months, a strategy he called the counterintelligence doctrine. In plain terms, it was a framework to keep foreign powers from controlling Africa's future. The doctrine had three core pillars: total transparency. Any foreign company or government operating in Africa would have to be fully open about their activities, no hidden deals, no secret agendas. Zero tolerance. If a group was caught spying or conducting covert operations, they would be expelled. Immediately, no warnings, no second chances. United defense. African nations would share intelligence and work together to monitor foreign activities, creating a network strong enough to keep outside powers in check. And this wasn't just aimed at Israel. Troy's doctrine was designed to protect Africa from any nation, no matter how powerful, that tried to manipulate, exploit, or dominate it. His message was clear: Africa must control its own land, its own resources, and its own destiny. For decades, powerful nations like Israel, the United States, and European powers had built their influence in Africa through deals for weapons, technology, and financial aid. But behind the promises of partnership were hidden motives: access to gold, diamonds, oil, and other resources. They sought intelligence on African governments, kept tabs on political leaders, and at times, even fueled conflicts between African nations to keep them divided and dependent. Troy didn't sugarcoat it. You funded our divisions, you mapped our minerals, you called us unstable when we refused your chains, he said. It was a direct accusation, exposing the quiet exploitation Africa had endured for years, where leaders were pressured to stay silent, to sign backroom deals, and to accept terms that benefited foreign powers far more than their own people. Troy was done playing by the old rules. He wanted to rewrite them and make Africa strong again. In Burkina Faso, the reaction was electric. Crowds poured into the streets outside the presidential compound, not to protest, but to celebrate. Young people waved banners that read, "Africa is not for sale and no more shadows." For too long, African nations had been treated like pawns in a global game, foreign powers striking deals behind closed doors, keeping their citizens in the dark. Troy shattered that silence. He made every move public, showing the world that Africa could stand tall and say no. The celebrations were more than just pride, they were about hope. For years, many Africans had felt their countries were being run by outsiders in suits who still thought like colonizers. Troy's actions gave them something they hadn't felt in decades: power. He wasn't just a president, he was their voice. Across the country, people began asking themselves what true freedom meant: not just independence from old colonial powers, but from the new ones trying to control Africa in subtler ways. In Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu was furious, but he was also cornered. He couldn't send soldiers into Burkina Faso without sparking an international crisis. He couldn't send diplomats, they were already being expelled. Even his traditional allies, like the United States and European powers, kept their distance. The U.S. issued a vague statement about restraint and dialogue, offering no real support. France, usually quick to back Israel, stayed silent. The European Union said nothing at all. They all understood the truth: Troy wasn't acting alone. He had become the face of a growing movement across Africa, one that was tired of being controlled. Inside Israel, government analysts had a name for it now: the Troy Doctrine. They saw it as a dangerous blueprint that other African leaders could follow, and they knew exactly what was at stake. Israel earns billions selling weapons, surveillance systems, and technology to African nations, deals that also open doors to critical intelligence, from mineral maps to migration patterns. If Troy's model spread, those profits and that influence could vanish overnight. For Netanyahu, this was no minor crisis, it was a potential disaster. Because what Troy had started in Burkina Faso was no longer just an act of defiance, it was the beginning of a continental movement. Reports began to emerge that 6 West African nations were quietly working together to compile a shared blacklist of foreign companies involved in spying or political interference. At the very top of that list were Israeli firms. Regional security agencies began trading intelligence. building a cooperative system to track foreign activity without relying on outside powers. For the first time, African nations were linking arms not just in words, but in action to defend themselves as one. Even the African Union, representing 54 nations, was preparing to step in. Sources revealed that a resolution was in the works to support Troy's ideas, urging every African country to resist covert foreign operations and reclaim control over their resources. Troy hadn't simply launched a crackdown, he had sparked a shift in the way Africa deals with the world. For centuries, Africa had been seen as a land to take from. Gold, diamonds, oil, and even people. Colonial powers carved the continent into pieces, drawing lines on maps without regard for the cultures or communities they tore apart. Independence brought flags and anthems, but in many places, foreign control lived on disguised in loans, weapons, and backroom deals. Troy's actions made it clear that era doesn't have to continue. By exposing Israel's hidden network and shutting down their operations, he sent a message to every global power: Africa is watching, and Africa is ready to act. The Troy Doctrine wasn't just about blocking spies. It was about arming African nations with the tools to say no to exploitative agreements and to shape their own destiny. Of course, Troy's movement will not be without challenges. Powerful countries like Israel, the United States, and others have deep pockets and deep influence. They won't surrender their foothold in Africa without a fight. Israel could cut aid or block technology transfers. Others might use economic leverage to punish countries that follow Troy's lead. And some African leaders might hesitate, worried about losing the perks of foreign-backed deals. But Troy has something far more potent: public support. Across Burkina Faso and beyond, people are rallying behind him. They see a leader who refuses to bow, who is willing to confront the old order head-on. His courage has lit a fire in young people, activists, and even other political leaders, pushing them to rethink Africa's place in the world. If more countries join him, this movement could form a united front to large and to determine for foreign powers to ignore. Troy's dismantling of Netanyahu's network is more than a bold political strike, it's a turning point. For too long, Africa has been treated as a stage where outsiders pull the strings. Troy is proving that narrative wrong. He is showing the world that African nations can cooperate, defend their sovereignty, and demand respect. The Troy Doctrine could mark the beginning of a new era, one where Africa sets its own terms, writes its own rules, and controls its own future. This isn't just about Burkina Faso or Israel. It's about every African country that refuses to be used. It's about every citizen who wants to see their land, resources, and voice respected. Troy has started something big and it's already spreading. Mali, Guinea, and Niger are just the beginning. More nations could follow, building a wave of change that could reshape the continent. His defiance has sent shockwaves across the globe. By standing up to Netanyahu, Troy has proven that Africa is no longer content to be a silent player. But this is only the first chapter. Will other leaders take up the cause? Will the Troy Doctrine become a model for the entire continent? And what will powerful nations do to try to crush this movement before it takes hold? One thing is certain: this is more than politics. This is a story of a continent rising, rejecting silence, and demanding to be heard.